This is something that I've been working on for more than 30, 35 years. And I can't help but start by saying, first there was the Sister Power. The Sister Power book came out nearly 30 years ago. And at that time, I was bold enough to say, look, Black women are stepping into leadership positions. They step into power positions, and you better get ready for them, because they're going to bring to the table a kind of sense of social justice, fight for equality that you haven't seen before. And that's not to say that the men didn't do their part. What I'm saying is that the sisters arrived, and they were there to say some things you have never been able to address, and we're going to make certain that you address these things right now. I keep toying with the notion, is time to write Sister Powers for real? Because in 1996, there was a lot for us to celebrate in regards to taking a look at Black women stepping into leadership positions. And these were non-traditional leadership positions. So it's not like Black women in charge of Black female sororities or things like that. These are sisters that stepped into the positions of Supreme Court, state Supreme Court justice, university college presidents, certainly in Congress, became mayors, got involved in a number of things that at that time they were saying, this is really the first time that we've been able to see Black women in power positions and Black women also in leadership positions. And so at that time, when I wrote the book, I had gone across the country interviewing Black women who were in non-traditional leadership roles, who were in new power roles. And after interviewing about, 50, 60, 70, whatever, I came up with a list of characteristics that these Black women shared. And I'm not here to say that every Black woman who assumed power became one of those phenomenal Black women. But most of them were able to rise to the occasion. And so there were characteristics that I saw among these women that were stepping into these positions, characteristics of what I described as phenomenal Black women. And one of them was that they were enriched from a very early age by strong support from their family, church, school, and community. It's a myth that people just arrive in leadership and no one had anything to do with it. Absolutely a myth. It's also a myth that the Black community within their families, even if they're dirt poor, can't produce strong Black women. And they were able to do that. And it certainly is not a myth to recognize the significance of community support and church support. This was something that was just fundamental to the women who said, this is how I made it here. This is how I got to this position. And some of those things, have changed a little bit. I'll talk about that later. These women, they were intensely focused on clearly identifiable goals. They knew where they were going. They knew how they were going to get there. They had to fight their way through, but they knew, I want to arrive at this point. And that was pretty much of a strong characteristic, in the late 20th century, because when I first started doing this study, and I pushed a computer, which was somewhat new at that time, in the late 1980s, and I put in the words Black female and put power. The screen came up blank. This is an oxymoron. Ain't no such thing as Black female and power. And I thought, darn. I don't know if anybody even suggested ever to these women you should go down this particular path, but they did. They certainly were imbued with humanistic values. These were sisters overall who stepped into the position and said, I'm about my people, but I'm about all people. I'm going to make sure whatever I do has a positive effect on people. And it's not just going to be about me in this new position of power, at least the sisters that I identify as absolutely phenomenal. Politically sophisticated. These were Black women that were always aware of the political environment they were in. And if you step into a leadership position or a power position, there's no such thing as being non-political. You have to figure out what's going on around you. And you have to understand it's going to have an impact on you. And one of the things that happened to these women, but also some of the women that I talk about later who came after, identify, there's some powerful, phenomenal Black women out there. You got to know if you're in this position, they're going to come after you. No matter what, they're going to come after you. No matter what your qualifications are, your experience, they're going to come after you. And if you stepped in this position, you didn't have awareness of that, you were in trouble. And so these women, politically sophisticated. And yes, they were profoundly spiritual. I used to tell the story when I talked about this a great deal. Secretary of State used to be for Pennsylvania, C. Dolores Tucker. C. Dolores Tucker was Secretary of State. She's first black female in position Secretary of State in Pennsylvania. And from the moment she stepped into that position, people were sort of after her. And one of the things that happened with C. Dolores Tucker is that one of the days when she was to report to work, she had heard through the grapevine that they were going to dismiss her. The government was going to get rid of her. He had all his cabinet sitting around, which were all white men. And so she walks into the room. She sees everybody in the circle. They have her say, take a seat. She took the seat, and they said, Mrs. Tucker, she said, wait, let us pray. And so she grabs her hand, they start praying. They finished praying, and she said, and something, you want to address me with something? They said, no, not today. And so one of the things that these women carried with them was the sense that, the power of the Spirit got to be with you, and you got to be connected to that. And they certainly were rooted in their own history as black women, as blacks and as women. And so these are not women that, came along and said, oh, I made it all by myself, or I don't understand. I don't want to be in a position where I don't understand that some women struggle before me or black people struggle before me. They knew that. And you had to know that in order to be successful in these kind of new positions. Because at some point, and this is true with everybody who rises to the top, male or female, when your butt gets in trouble, you got to go back and find your people and say, come help me out of this. And I don't want to use this analogy, but we all just heard the news last week about OJ dying. And peace, pray for his soul and all that kind of stuff. But y'all recall when OJ got in trouble, he had to come back to the black folk and say, get me out of this, right? He had abandoned us a long time ago, but when you're in difficulty, you got to come back and find your people, right? And so they were clear about that. And so I used to say, and I continue to say, if a sister walks into the room and they're having conversations about race or whatever, and they say something like, I don't see myself as a black woman, move away from them. Because there is no denying who you are. And you have to accept, this is how I got here in the first place, to some extent. And then lastly, they certainly were socially conscious and dedicated to what I call a social agenda that transcended their own personal gains. Now, I'm talking about powerful black women. I'm talking about revolutionary sort of sister warriors who are not in it for themselves. And that's a hard characteristic to find these days, because we know that some of the leaders, some of the people who want to be leaders of this country are in it solely for personal gain. And so these were not those kind of women. And so when Dr. Sati said, what's your title? And I said, it's going to be Sister Waters. It's going to start with Fannie Lou Hamer. I can't help but talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. She was probably, in some ways, the biggest inspiration to me when I started in the 80s and the 90s, saying, I got to find out where these powerful sisters are. I got to find out who are the sisters who are in leadership. Most importantly, and even though I didn't list this as characteristics of phenomenal black women, I had to find out who were the sisters with courage. Because in order to step out at any point and say, I'm going to assume a leadership role, I'm going to assume an activist role, I'm going to go against the grain, you got to have courage. And you got to have courage because, as I said earlier, if you're in that position, they're coming for you. And if they're coming for you, you're going to have to be prepared. Now, some of these women, the earlier sisters that I talked about, who I studied, who were powerful women, came in their own sort of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. Fannie Lou clearly was one of them. And she comes into the role of being an activist, a social activist, at a time when black people didn't even want to hear from a woman. People who were organizing the civil rights movement didn't want to hear from a woman. They certainly didn't want to hear from this woman because, Fannie Lou came right off the old plantation. She came off, she wasn't educated, she wasn't highly educated, but she was in a position where one of the things she had was talent, and she could sing and rally the people. But she also had courage. And she said, I heard about these sophisticated women coming out of the North, talking about voter registration and all that. I'm going to be a part of that. And she was. And if you know the story of Fannie Lou, which none of us know enough about Fannie Lou, when I say none of us, it's not something that they teach us in school. And it's not something that the community has embraced enough to pass down. But this was a person who, when she arrived at the new, Democratic National Convention in 1964 in Atlantic City, And when she got behind that podium and said, "I question America," she shook up the president of the United States and said, "Look, y'all gonna have to turn off those TVs. Y'all, I'm gonna have to have a news conference of my own. Here you got this black woman talking about, I'm fearful for my life because I live in America. And what are you talking about when you tell me about equality or freedom or social justice? It's not something that I've had. It's not something that I've experienced." Most of you know the story that ends there. She didn't get her seat. She represented Mississippi Democratic Party, but she made a statement that day that resonates to this day. And so one of the things that I got involved in, along with my brother here, more than 15, 16 years ago, was raising funds to build the Fannie Lou Hamer Memorial Statue in Ruleville, Mississippi. And even that was an incredible task, because when we said to people, we want to build this full-length bronze statue, and at that point, there were only 2 other black females who had a bronze statue, in the nation. Well, one of the things that people said, well, you're not going to be able to raise any money because people have always tried to raise money off her name, and they squandered it, and therefore, who's going to give? Who's going to give to that? But we figured it out, with the help of my husband and National Black United Fund. We were able to raise over $100,000 in less than 18 months, build that statue, and had nearly 1,000 people come out to say, we need to recognize this. And I was just telling my husband, I said, I went online. I wanted to get some pictures of Fannie Lou and whatever. I said, they got me online everywhere, online with the Fannie Lou thing. They got you on there too, on the Fannie Lou thing. And then just, when was it, last October, we also donated a statue to Atlantic City, and they put it in Boardwalk Hall, where Fannie Lou made her statement in 1964. But the reason why I start out with her is because she was a sister who came from the masses of the people, who had the courage to say, "I'm going to step forth and challenge what's going on," and she paid the price. She paid the price physically, she paid the price emotionally. She died an early death because something like, treatment for breast cancer wasn't available to her, as a poor black woman. But Fannie Lou inspired me. And hopefully she's inspiring a lot of other people. And another woman that I came across that I said, darn, you got courage to do that, was the Reverend Willie Barrows, who's also no longer here. And Willie Barrows, was like 4'11". And she was in Chicago, and she was working with the Jesse Jackson organization, Operation Breadbasket, Rainbow Club. She's working with these things. And you might recall that back in the day, Jesse Jackson supposedly was one of the individuals that went to corporate America and said, you got to do something about your interaction with corporate America, with black community. We got to have business contracts, and we got to do it. No, that wasn't Jesse. That was Reverend Willie Barrows. And the interesting thing about it is that she was in a position where she was acting as the person behind the scene, sort of assistant to or whatever. And at some point, they had a loss of leadership in the directorship of the organization. And Jesse came to her and said something like, we need to find a man that can do. She said, you're not finding any more men. You're going to find a woman. The woman is standing right here. And if you want this work to go forward, it's going to be this woman, this little woman, that's going to do the task. And she did. She was a powerhouse. And everything she got involved in was successful on the basis of, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for my people. I'm doing this to make sure that things can move forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, look, we've had some revolutionary sister warriors too. And they came before this last generation here, but they were there. You got to remember, anybody who's my age or anywhere close to it, Angela Davis. Angela Davis made a statement at a time where, yes, they came after her. That she was at one point probably the most wanted woman on the FBI list, why? Because she was doing the black empowerment thing. Because she was fighting the cause. She was fighting for the people. She's talking about social justice. And there's no way they were going to let that ride by itself. No. She became a target. You have to know about Kathleen Cleaver. What was happening in their organization. She was, very famous, very active Black Panther member. How did she get into leadership? Well, they put all the men in jail or tried to kill them. And so we have to step up and take over. And she had to explain repeatedly to people, you're misrepresenting us, you're misrepresenting our organization, what we're about, and why we're here, but I'm here to straighten you out. And because I also grew up during that period of time, I was so heavily influenced by these revolutionary social poets, women who took a leadership role in poetry and a definite leadership role in Black poetry and during the Black arts movement. I can quote for you almost, what Nikki Giovanni said when she said, in the beginning was the word was nigger, the word was deaf to all niggers, the word was deaf to all peace, be still. I think we ran around campus repeating that to every white person we saw, said, look, it's about the revolution. And when Gwendolyn Brooks wrote for my people everywhere, it inspired you to do something. It inspired you to take action. And they were able to do it with the pen. Yes. And they reminded me of a person that had long gone, Ida B. Wells Barnett. Ida B. Wells Barnett was sister warrior number one at the beginning of the 19th century. But again, if you're a sister warrior, they're coming after you. Her own people came after her too. Ida B. Wells Barnett was one of the founders of the NAACP, but they said, you're not going to assume a leadership role because we can't have a woman like you up here trying to give orders to some men. What? But what she was able to do, was to fight the war with her sword, which was the pen. And she was the journalist. And more than any other journalist and any other activist during that time, she was the one that every day brought attention to the lynching of men in the South, the lynching of Black men in the South. She had the NAACP hanging out signs said, such and such was lynched today. Right. And she dedicated her life to it. Even though, again, people around her tried to, push her back, said, we need you in the background. It's not a position that she wanted to take. And when I wrote Sister Power, the first person I focused on who was really a sister warrior at that time and continues to be today was Congresswoman Maxine Waters. And Maxine Waters, when she arrived in Congress, and she was among the first, and certainly, I salute Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, who was like the first Black woman that ends up, in Congress following the first Black woman, period. One of the times when I talked with her, she said, we were talking about the run for the presidency. And you remember Jesse Jackson was making his run, and everybody was talking about, the greatness of Jesse Jackson doing it. She said, I think these people forgot that I did that. I was the first Black person that said, I'm going to run for presidency on a Democratic ticket. And yeah, they forgot, because people thought you had the audacity to do it in the first place. We can't have you up there talking about I can lead the nation. But Maxine Waters steps in Congress and she brings her experience from Watts with her. She steps into Congress and she begins to say, there's some things y'all not going to do here anymore. And her stories of being kicked and battered, and disparaged, are extremely emotionally disturbing. But she hung in there anyway. Maxine Waters was the person that began to question, how could all this crack come into the Black community and the government don't know anything about it? How could all this crack come across the border, end up in the Black community, and the government don't know anything about it, And they tried to kick her out of Congress for that. But she raised questions about, even if the government says we're not behind this, like the CIA and all that, what are you doing to control this? Nothing. Because it ended up in the Black community. And so, yeah, Maxine, she was one of those early sister warriors who got into Congress. And when she arrived, said, some things are going to change here. We're going to do some things differently. And there were other women, along with her. Was the first Black female sitter, Carol Moseley Braun. Who's the one that's responsible for, y'all not going to be stamping this Southern symbol, imperature on all of our flags. And you got to get rid of this. Well, they came after her. It's like, what are you talking about? It's our heritage. It ain't your heritage. It represents the losing efforts of the Confederacy and an ongoing symbol for white supremacy. And yeah, she served her one term and then she was out. It's like, if you're there, I don't know how long you're going to be there. And so, you know, from the time where I started writing this stuff in the 90s and 2000 and move on and so forth, I saw the emergence of more sister, powerful women, phenomenal women, but also the emergence of what I described as sister warriors. You were all around. You were all around with Meryl Bowser, painted on 16th Street, Black Lives Matter. DC was going crazy. How dare this black woman go out here and paint Black Lives Matter on a major street? She said, because it needed to be done. I needed to make a statement. They need to know where DC is located on these issues. And she did it in such a bold way that people began to say, you know, you got to watch out for a woman like that. What did I say early? Be afraid, be real afraid. You know, these women are coming in and they're saying they're going to do things in ways that are different from what we understood things should have to be done. And so and then you start looking at what's the background of these women. And I went back and said, these are the same women who became powerful 30, 40 years ago. And they had the same characteristics. And some of them even enhanced their characteristics, their links to the black community, and they went in with no shame. Like, yes, I'm connected to this. Because one of the things that people used to do, that black men and women, when they attempted to move into an office, a powerful office, or get elected, sometimes they had the habit of deracializing themselves. You know, I'm going to go in, but I'm not going to say any of that black stuff. I'm not going to be tied to the black community. And y'all remember the controversy when Obama first got elected, and Tavis Smiley, you know, questioning, wait a minute, you know, brother, you can't come to our stuff. You can't come. You can't come to our forum anymore. What do you mean you can't come? You don't want to show up, you know. But you see what happened to Tavis? They kicked his butt off the air, you know. And even, you know, and look, I think Obama was great. But I raised question when he first came in. I said, well, what's your black agenda? I said it to some newspaper. Everybody, I don't care if you're black or white. What's your agenda for the black community? You know, I got hate mail. Sister, you hating? No, I ain't hating. I'm raising questions about, well, what are you going to do? You know, that kind of thing. But some people, in order to move into certain positions, you know, find that we got to downplay all that black connection stuff. And I can't tell you how tickled I was when your mayor was elected and the sisters from Delta went to the floor, surrounded her, and did their Delta thing. I said, there's no misrepresentation. She a sister from the hood. I mean, she's a sister that's with the rest of us. And that is just coming up here lately. Because earlier on, people were like, well, you don't want to say too much about that, you know? And so women who came behind, who are now evidence, you know, who are these sister warrior people? They're women like Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Yeah, she runs for office. She doesn't get elected, but she organized so many voters and had voter turnout at an all-time high. And so what was she saying? What were they saying? You know, in some ways, we're going to take action, but we also coming to get you. And that's the same thing with the sister on the end. Latasha Jones, I think her last name is, organized Black Voters Matter. And throughout the state, and not just the state of Georgia, but spreading to other places, you know, black people, you have to understand that we're going to use the power of the vote. Something that they had fought for so hard, you know, during the civil rights movement. You know, this current generation said, you know, we got to get back on the ball here because this is important for us to be involved in. And whether you agree with the tactics or not, those three sisters who started Black Lives Matter, you know, sister warriors for sure. At one point, Time magazine indicated they may be some of the most influential black women in the nation. Right. You know, because what happened, you know, they organized Black Lives Matter, and yes, it was a powerful movement from the beginning, but when George Floyd was killed, it picked up traction in such a way. Its organizing efforts as far as the masses of people being involved and its national and its international scope was greater than the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s. It was like, look, they have said to us, We have to address the issue of Black lives being slaughtered, or being murdered, or being victim of all kinds of violence. Black lives matter. And so they get credit for that. And even if some of them have fallen out of grace or whatever the case may be, we need somebody else to pick up the mantle and move forward in the same way these sisters were willing to do like a decade, ago. And that, it becomes important that we're able to point to people now and say, here are the people who are fully engaged. Here are the people who are fighting for social equality, social justice. These are the people that if we can't follow, we need to identify the next generation that can. Some of us, I'm an elder now. Somebody told me that when I got that award for a celebrated elder. Okay, what about the elders? The elders have done their part. It's the next generation. And so I'm doing whatever I can to make certain that we can identify and see that next generation can be engaged. Now, come on. If Fonnie Willis is not a sister warrior, I don't know who is. And what are they saying about Fonnie Willis? Basically, in our language, she takes no prisoners. Now, we know about her because of her actions with the former ex-president. But she was kicking butt before that. And the interesting thing about Fonnie Willis's story is how deeply rooted she is in the Black experience. She came from parents that were activists, parents that were Panthers. She went to HBCU. It's like, I know exactly who I am. And when she decided she could take on this job as district attorney, and she knew that there was a person who had engaged in illegal, corrupt activity, she said, I'm coming to get you. And that has to be your ex-president's worst nightmare. A Black woman coming after him. And with all of that what's been going on in the years that they've been questioning the activities of this person, it's Fonnie Willis that brought your butt down to the courtroom, took your mud picture, and said, and we're coming after you. And if you think they didn't come after her, they did. This is a person that they were trying at one point to say, you're disqualified because you had sex with a man. Give me a break. Give me a break. And people were saying she shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have done what? Shouldn't have done what? It wasn't even a married man. What are we talking about? And one of the interviews I saw of Fonnie Willis, she said, excuse me, you're saying something's wrong that I had sex with a man? Ridiculous. And even the judge's ruling that said, no, you're not disqualified. But even he went too far. He even went too far. Said, talk about, question her behavior. What the heck are you talking about? And, everybody in that courtroom, everybody else screwing somebody. But if you step into a position of leadership and power as a Black woman, you have to be doubly careful. They are coming after you. They're trying to find anything they can. And another example of that, at one point, yes, I was celebrating when Claudine Gay became president of Harvard, the first Black and the first woman president of Harvard. One of the things that I talked about in 1996 was, when are we ever going to have Black female presidents of Ivy League institutions? And Ruth Simmons was one. Yeah, she was one. Gay stepping into that position as president of Harvard. Harvard is the #1 most prestigious institution in the United States. I said, yes, sister, you go on. She was out 6 months later. And one of the reasons why she was out, she was a Black woman and they were coming after her from Jump Street. From Jump Street. And so they went back and started researching all of her writings and stuff like that. Now, anybody in here who's had to do a master's thesis or a PhD thesis, or you had to write something that was 300-400 pages, you're going to miss something at some point. There's a line in there somewhere that somehow or another the footnote left it, or the parentheses left. Look, if they put me in a position that said, we're going to check everything you've written, I've written all my work. But I bet you can find somewhere, some line that, but such and such said that first. But she should have known that they were coming after her. Her support system needed to be firmly behind her. And see, that's one of the things that a lot of times doesn't happen with these powerful black women. They get into positions and then their backup is not there. And when I say the backup is not there, I mean the black folk, the black community is not there. Even when you fight to get that person in, once they're in, people become nervous about, tying themselves too closely to that person. And so a lot of times when these women fall, and I could spend all day talking about the number of women who I described as powerful, influential, that some of them fell. Some of them absolutely fell. I'm thinking, for example, years ago, Emma Chappelle. Emma Chappelle was the first black woman who built a bank, a commercial bank here in Philadelphia. Phenomenal black woman. They came after her. Ended, yes. And who was there to say, oh no, we fighting against this? No, black community wasn't like, oh, we're rallying behind this. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I can't get into it, but there are a lot of reasons for that. But we need to be able to support these women who are in these positions that we know that people are going to attack them just because they're black people, and just because they're women. And it is a double whammy. It is. Being both black and female, it is a double whammy. But one of the things that has happened just in the last 10 years or so. In fact, in 2017, there was a article in the New York Times, and it said this might be the year of black female mayors. So all of a sudden, you got these black women mayors of these major cities, which was true. You had the mayor of Chicago. She was a sister, came after her too. The mayor of Chicago. You had the mayor of Atlanta, and she wasn't the first one, Lance. Lance Bottom. She wasn't the first one, because before her, a woman that I talked about in my book was Shirley Franklin, who came out of Philly, who went to the University of Pennsylvania, who had to fight her way out of that because she said, Penn, as I often said when I went there, they asked me when I was at Penn working on my doctorate, and they felt like I didn't know where I was. And they said, do you know where you are? I said, yes, in West Philly, in West Philly. I grew up about 12 blocks from here. Their position was, you are at the University of Penn, Ivy League school. I'm in West Philly. I don't know what's been going on here. But I've been in this neighborhood. But my point about that is that a lot of these women had to go through educational programs where people tried to beat them down. Absolutely tried to beat them down. I had a conversation once with Julianne Malveaux, who became one of the first black women to go to MIT and get a degree in economics. She said she walked on that campus and people thought, you're not supposed to be here. Like, what the heck are you doing? And you're going to study economics? And you're going to do what? And, she went on to be a journalist, a president of one of the HBCUs, Bennett College, et cetera. But even in those positions, and I think she was president in about 2009, 8, or whatever. Even those positions, she said you have to sort of look over your shoulder all the time. There are people who are mad that you're there, and there are people who have to figure out from Jump Street, how can we get rid of you? And for black women, they pick on the strangest kind of things. One of the things that happened with her, and she said they started this rumor that my skirts were too short, and that was inappropriate for a college president. And the fact that it got traction is what was scary. That people started talking, well, look, that skirt, look, what's going on here? But again, you have to know that these things are going to happen. I think Fonnie Willis has been one of the best prepared sisters in leadership. I'm not surprised she survived this first attempt to say, we're going to have you removed. But again, the fear that has run through the justice system, the political system, that you see what this black woman down there has the absolute nerve to do. Yes, because there were a whole lot of people before her and in other places that didn't have the nerve to move forward. Right. And she did. And that's scary. It's absolutely scary. But if anybody is even equally scary, it's Letitia James, you know? And so what's happening now? That person who's your ex-president is probably up late at night calling these people all kinds of B's and everything else. I can't believe, I'm sure he's saying, I can't believe these black women are coming to get me. And in one case, we got you. You know, Letitia James was sitting across was making a statement about, what are you going to do about the Trump building? She said, I look at it every day. I sit across from it every day. And if he doesn't do what he's required to do, I'm coming to get it. You know, and no hesitation about it. And so here's this woman who gets into office and she lets them know if the ex-president has done something wrong, he's going to be treated just like everybody else. And people are like, how dare you? You know, how dare you? Especially a black female. And so you think they're coming after her? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But one of the things she has going for her is that there are people who have rallied and said, we are going to support. We see what's happening here, and we're not going to let anybody take you down, including that white judge. Said, you ain't coming here with this crap. You know, not to her, but to the other side. And so I think that what we are in the midst of experiencing is really an explosion of sister warriors who are active right now. We need to know who they are. We need to find out how we can support, and we need to prepare the next generation to make sure there's no giant gap between, you know, one of the things that we haven't been able to deal with is that we were all the activists during the 60s and the 70s. Yeah. We were the people who were part of the Black Power and Civil Rights movement. It was us. We were the people storming around on campuses saying, you're going to change, you're going to offer courses. We were there tearing things up. But the next generation said, I ain't got time for that. And then there was either another generation said, I don't know, I got time for that. It took a while, you know, and the Black Lives Matter movement was helpful to this, for students on campuses to start saying, there's something wrong here with your interaction with black folk, with the number of black faculty you don't hire, with black staff you don't hire, the decline in black student enrollment. What's going on here? It took a while. That's because one of the things that happened, I think, after the modern day civil rights and Black Power movement is that we sort of took a break. We weren't focused on the next generation. And every time I hear these, and you know, I guess I'm about to get the wave here. Every time I hear these polls saying something like, it's the young black men who are supporting Trump. Who are these people? Right? Who are these people? Who are they talking to? Like, who they talking to? But another part of that is, have you encountered some of these young, more conservative, you know, quote unquote, black professional men? Some of them, from my point of view, they ain't on the right track. Why ain't they on the right track? I mean, you hear them saying things like, well, under Trump, we had more money. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? We had more opportunity. What universe do these people live in? You know, and on the other hand, it may be that's the same generation that went over to I don't want to say the temples, I went to temple, but went over to the temples and everybody else. Went to their MBA programs and got the black washed right out of them, you know. And one of the reasons why that's happening is because we no longer insisted that you had to have a black presence in these places. You know, once we moved beyond we had this affirmative action push, and even those of us who went in under a program like affirmative action, I've been at Stockton for more years than I like to admit, for 48 years. But when I went to Stockton, I had no doubt it was because they had affirmative action program. I mean, they said, we got to find black faculty people. We have to do that. I came in, yes. I mean, I only had my master's a year, but I had a master's. They said that's what I needed, all right? They said you needed some experience. I worked 1 year at a psychiatric institute. That's it. And so somebody there said, we're going to hire her because we need her. We need a black female on this program. Okay, good. Other people came in with me at other institutions during that time. I went around and said, how do you feel about being part of the affirmative action program? I ain't part of that program. It had nothing to do with me. I came in on all my qualifications all by myself. You know, that was not true. Because everybody was forced to look at the reasons why they needed to diversify, you know, their faculties. And so one of the things that also happened is that people tried to move away from some of the benefits that they received from the struggle. And there's no greater example than that Clarence Thomas, right? There's no greater example than Clarence Thomas. You know, he goes to Yale and them on these affirmative action programs. He gets on the court, and it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with you. Yale wasn't looking for anybody like you only because they had, you know, a special initiative. And I'm saying all that to say, we are still in the midst of the struggle. I'm saying all that to say, we have to use all the resources that we have to advance to the next step, to the next level. And right now, our best opportunity to take a giant leap forward is with the power of the sisters, the sister warriors, and that's why I'm here. All right. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so yes, okay. Let me just say you are seeing in action a sister warrior. This is a sister warrior, and she has always been a sister warrior. And I'm just delighted that we got a chance to hear her today. But we got some. You know, this is a very what should I say? A very powerfully, historically correct audience, and they got some questions for you. We are very happy. Go right here.
Yes, sir. Right here.
Hotep. Yeah, I'm very inspired by the black female warriors. We go back into old Dahomey, where you had a women's and a men's army.
Yes.
Where the women aren't as strong as the men, but the women are faster than the men and have more dexterity. And they had special weapons designed for the women and women's kill techniques and what have you that were incredible. And these same people were brought in extremely large numbers into Haiti. And you know what happened with the women and children that fought with extreme valor in the Haitian Revolution that facilitated a process that should not have been humanly possible. This is the legacy of the female warrior. And
Yes,
you
it
come
is.
all the way up to like a Harriet Tubman
Yes, it is.
that walked on foot.
Okay, so you have a question.
So I'm just going to say carry on and yeah.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Carry on.
He's inspired.
Yeah, I just want to throw a couple names out there that
Okay.
C. Dolores Tucker and Ona Weldon and Shirley Chisholm. Mm-hmm. They're women warriors.
Yes.
Very powerful, sister. Very powerful. We really
Thank
do
you.
appreciate it. Two questions. What's happening with BLM now? And have you had a chance to look at some of our, and the brother talked a little bit about that, the women warriors from Africa, like Yah Santaban, Queen Makeda, and Fatima of Haiti and all that sort. Have you had a chance to examine those folks?
I've had a chance to read about them. They haven't really been a part of my scholarly sort of serious study, but I had a chance to read about them as I was doing background material to write the book on sister power. And so, yes, I'm aware. And my colleague now, Kamoni Ayar, actually just published a book on the struggles and on the Haitian struggle, and in it highlights the sister warriors in that text. And so, yes, there's some awareness. Your second question, what's happening now with Black Lives Matter? I don't know enough to be able to articulate a position that makes sense right now. There has been some controversy, and even with the controversy, and one of the organizers or founders stepped down, even with all of that, and there's this big question about what did y'all do with the money, but again, if you're in that position, they're gonna come after you. You have to prepare yourself for that. I think with the movement itself, like Black Lives Matter as a mass movement, it no longer has this kind of strength that it did following the death of George Floyd. And that's not unusual because movements are cyclical. And there's a moment when it's an opportunity for people to jump in. And it could be some precipitating event that results in people saying we got to do something now. You know, when we reflect on all the quote unquote rebellions that happened in the Black community in the 60s and the 70s, what the other people call riots, we knew were rebellions. Almost all of them were tied to a police incident. You know, something happened or people thought something happened and people took to the streets and there were mass protests and so on and so forth. But then that moment is over and you have to wait for the next moment because there's really no planning a particular rebellion. Like I said, it's some event that usually happens, that usually occurs. And so I think it was a tremendous outpouring of support for Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, from Black people, white people, people over in England. I mean, it was like, okay, we're behind this. And we saw the activity in the summer of what was 20, I think it was, or 22, whenever it was. But the next summer, it was gone. It was gone. And people sort of said, you know, we got to move on. And so if I had to just take a guess where people are now, people are sort of moving on to something else. And of course, you know, COVID just killed a whole lot of things. You know, that episode with COVID just killed a whole lot of things. And so I think the next time we see that kind of activism, it's not going to be led by Black Lives Matter. It's going to be something else. What that something else is, you know, I'm not sure.
Yes. Yes, I noticed when you had said about affirmative action, how some Black people think that it wasn't beneficial.
Right.
And, yes, because I have an uncle who's in his mid-60s, and he went to college around the time when affirmative action came into play. Because in fact, he went to Ohio State for a year before he transferred to Emporia State out in Kansas. But he said, okay, he actually told me he was in agreement with them stripping away affirmative action for colleges to be, because he said, well, that don't make no sense to be admitted because you're Black and so forth. And then he also said that affirmative action was actually an extension of the GI Bill for the 1940s. Well, so my question is, why do you think people like my uncle and other Blacks feel that way? And is there really a connection between the GI Bill that was introduced in the 1940s and affirmative action? No, that's not the connection between the GI Bill and affirmative action. No. Affirmative action, the words were first articulated by John F. Kennedy in 1962, Executive Order 10925, which he said, you know, if we're going to deal with this inequality, we're going to have to take affirmative action. You can't just assume that things can be equal overnight. You know, I think people like your uncle, who I do not know, and other folks like that are fully engaged in the process of American assimilation. You know, this false notion that somehow everything here operates on a merit base, everything is based on your hard work. That is BS to the hilt. It just doesn't happen in that way. And that one of the things that people tend to forget. Now, you know, just last year, the Supreme Court stripped affirmative action programs, you know, at Harvard and other places. You can't do this anymore. Let me tell you how ridiculous that is. First of all, they admit people all the time on the basis of some characteristic, particularly the legacy one, which means if your parents or grandparents went here, you get in here too. You know, something that they perhaps should have attacked. But there's no way you can say we're going to try to achieve a level of diversity among our student population if you don't know who the heck they are, if people can't tell you who they are. So one of the challenges now to college students who are applying to college, Black and white, is that they're being cautious and they're being told you can't say anything about your race. Don't say anything about what group you're from because that's going to disqualify. Well, how the heck are you going to know who you're getting in there? And one of the things that people are so misunderstood about the affirmative action initiatives in this country, the policies in this country, because affirmative action wasn't a law, it was a series of policies and programs and so on and so forth. But Johnson, President Johnson, who started out as somebody from the South, but ended up being, whether we like it or not, one of the greatest civil rights presidents of our nation's history.
You know, and yeah, it was Johnson that pushed forth that voting rights bill and a civil rights bill, even if he did it because he saw Fannie Lou Hamer down there shaking up the nation, you know. But Johnson used to make this statement, or he made a statement at least one time. He said, you can't tell somebody that they've been chained and bound and bring them to the front line and say you're going to run the race now, just like everybody else. There's no way for the nation to move forward and really achieve more higher levels of equality if you do not consider the race factor. There's no way. And what I frequently tell my students is, you know what the problem was with affirmative action? The problem with affirmative action is that they failed to implement the Freedmen's Bureau. And had they implemented the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865 and delivered the 40 acres of mule and everything else that they were going to do to make black people fully integrated into society, we wouldn't be here. And that's why we're here. And that's why the next generation is going to have to deal with it too. Because there's no doubt that we carried the burden from being enslaved, from being impoverished, from Jim Crow laws, from all kinds of discrimination. Everywhere we carry that burden. Even, look, people sometimes look at me and say, wow, look, you know, you're successful. Really? You know, yeah, you made it, right? You got a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania. You're a full professor, distinguished professor somewhere. Yeah? When I walk outside, you know what they see? I see a black woman with braids. They see a black woman with braids. And no matter how much achievement I had, I tell the story often about my son and my daughter. You know, my daughter's the oldest one, the older one. When they were teenagers, and I had my good job, and I lived in a integrated neighborhood. Willingboro was more black than it was integrated, but lived in that neighborhood. I went out and bought myself a luxury car. I mean, it was an Infiniti, but it was luxury to me, right? I'm in my car driving around. You know, I'm privileged, right? My daughter, she's 17. She turned 17. She gets her license. She gets in a car. She drives around the car. My son turned 17 and said, Mom, you need to buy me a car. I said, no, that's what white people do. I said, you know, black people don't be buying no car, you know, just because you turned 17. I said, you have to drive my car. He was stopped virtually every other day. A black man in a luxury car driving down the street. I can't transfer all of this quote unquote achievement to my kids. You know, because I still carry as black people, we carry the burden of the past. And it hasn't been resolved yet. And until it is, there's still more work we have to do, you know. And because now we're not going to have affirmative action, but you're going to have something else. You could call it whatever you want, but you're going to have something else.
Ms. Patricia, your lecture totally your lecture totally enriches my knowledge of powerful women, of black warrior women. There's a book called the Black Farmers that Fannie Lou Hamer was really instrumental in the creation of, in reading that book, it made me gave me a better understanding and better knowledge of who Fannie Lou Hamer was. Mm-hmm. And so as you talk about these black warriors, I'm really glad to have been introduced to the knowledge of the different women that you have talked about.
Thank you. And I mean, one of the things that you're right, Fannie Lou Hamer was involved in the farming effort in her community. They actually ran the community farm for almost 10 years so that people could get their food who were too poor to go and buy vegetables and all that. And so, one of the characteristics of these warrior sisters is that they were always engaged in activities to uplift the community. It was never about something I had to do to enrich myself, and the farming initiative was one of them. Thank you.
I wanted to say fantastic and thank you. I had the benefit of knowing some of those older women
Okay.
And I want to point out that we happen to have one in our audience today, Honorable Councilwoman Jenny Blackman.
And I know who she is. I know who she is. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for pointing. And would you like to say a few words, I'm
enjoying you.
I did want to say to you, in those organizations, the early organizations like the Black Panthers and many of them, we have freedom schools. Those non-white women and young men, many of the men were murdered, as you pointed out. We went to school.
Right,
we
right.
studied the system. We read Marx and Lenin, capitalism. We did it. We studied it. And so I wanted to share that with you because the idea that they just come to prominence, as you point out, is true, but they come with the lesson of learning and learning about the struggles also. So I don't want to leave out that learning process.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that was going on, certainly immediately during and immediately following the movement. But again, when we look at where those things are right now, there's been a decline. Yes. There's been an absolute decline in some of those independent kinds of schools and organizations.
That's why you and the Malefic Care something Institute is so important. We have to have it. You know?
Okay, so the last question. Okay.
I'm the last question. Okay. No pressure. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you for a fabulous program. I have two questions. I am a Black historian, female, first African American female of the city of Camden. And my first question is, how do you navigate in a community that's predominantly Black and brown to unearth history that's predominantly Black and brown in today's society where that's been whitewashed? And I constantly have to navigate the slippery slope of being too pro-Black, not being inclusive, when I want to make sure that my people's history is brought back to the forefront. And my second question is, I'm also currently getting my master's degree in higher education. And I want to know, from your experience, how do you navigate the BS when you're constantly questioned by white professors about the authenticity of your work? So those are my questions.
Let me try to answer the first one. And I'm answering it too with the background of my daughter, who's a teacher, a fourth grade teacher in the Willingboro school system. And like I said, I've been in higher education for 48 years. And I used to tell my students, and I admit, telling them this, it was like, you're really putting fire under us and their wrists to acting in this way. That's true. And I may have had more protection because I was at an institution of higher ed, but also because I always had my support group with me. But you go in with a commitment to tell the truth and to do what you know is right. And you do it in such a way that whoever your superiors are, etc., are informed that this is the only accurate approach that we can take. And we must include this information or whatever the case may be. And then you do it. Now, when you do it and they come after you, you have to let them know, well, there's a parents' organization here that's going to protest if you go in that direction. When I used to do things at Stockton, and I know some of them are online now, when I used to do things at Stockton, clearly that was a pro-Black statement, activity, or whatever. And to give you an example of, I teach African dance there. And I've been teaching African dance there from Jump Street. And then one semester, the dance program said, we need this studio. You can't teach this African dance. And the African dance class was tied to the annual Kwanzaa celebration, something that Stockton's been celebrating probably more than any other university. And so they canceled the class and blah, 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 blah. And so somehow or another, the word got out to the newspaper, because I leaked it. Right? The word got out to the newspaper that something's going on. And then the word got out to the student NAACP chapter, because I leaked it, right? And the sense at the university was, I think there are people coming here for us. Yeah. They weren't really, but I made you think that my support group was out there and that I know I'm doing the right thing. And so you're going to have to resolve this thing in my favor. Otherwise, there's going to be some kind of protest. And actually what happened with the dance class is the president, the former president now, but the president showed up at the Kwanzaa and the people weren't there. He said, what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. The president went to the School of Arts and Humanities and said, you will never, ever again put her in a position where the studio is not available for her use. And that ended it. But the part of the reason why it could be resolved was because I wasn't going to be silent. I wasn't going to back down. I was going to find ways to sort of provide some agitation under it with my support group, whether they were there fully or not. I figured out that I had to do it, but there was no way that I wasn't going to take the action. And so my students would say to me as I tell them, you got to do this, you got to do that. And one student came back to me once and said, Dr. Reid Merritt, I did exactly what you said. I was fighting for my people, and I did this. They fired me. Okay, I know. That can happen. But if you got fired from that position because of your stance and what you had to do in order to provide education or provide experiences, stories about experience, then you didn't belong in that job. Right. You didn't belong in that job. You have to move on and find somewhere. You have to locate yourself in a place where you can fight. And sometimes you have to fight until they let you go, but you still have to fight. You have to locate yourself in a place you have to fight. The problem with education, anybody in here who said advanced education, no, you go through it. You go through it in a variety of different ways. Now, I had a different master's experience because I went to Temple in 73, and no, Dr. Asante hadn't arrived yet, but Dr. Thad Mathis was there. And Dr. Thad Mathis was there, and I went to the School of Social Administration, and the first person I encountered was this Dr. Thad Mathis, who wasn't that much older than me at the time. But Temple in 1971 had decided they had to create a school of social work, social administration that recruited a whole lot of black people. Because these were the years of war and poverty and model cities and all that. And they didn't have any black people to hire, because we weren't in. We didn't have master's degrees and all of that. We weren't in. And so they decided they had to do that. And literally, half of the school came in were black folk, and they weren't the only one that did it. Other universities had to, we got to do something about this. But they also hired black faculty and black staff. No problem. No, I'm not dismissing the fight. Yes. No. I'm not dismissing the fight. And that's what I said earlier about the students' activism that was on campus that brought these programs. I mean, think about the first Black Studies programs that were created. It's because the students fought. Yes. But I'm saying once Temple did it, and once Temple brought in the students and black faculty and staff to support them, then I could go to school and get a master's and become as radical as I wanted to because they had the support there. Now, that has disappeared too. And so you have to be careful when you pick what school am I going to? Who's going to be there? And then if you get there and you discover, oh my God, these are not my people, then it's your responsibility to figure out, what do you want for me to get out of here? I remember when I was at Penn, and I was writing a paper on impact affirmative action in higher education. And people at Penn were fighting with me about it. Well, every school of social work has affirmative action. Look, they were fighting me about it, right? And I went to my mentor, couldn't get through, crying the blues, can't do this, can't. He said, look, you're supposed to write a paper. Write the paper. When you leave there, go for the affirmative action fight. Figure out what you got to do in order to get that degree and move on if you discover that the people there are not as supportive. But that's part of, whether you're male or female, understanding the political environment that you're in. And these schools that we go to, even some of HBCUs aren't supportive. You have to figure out the political environment that you're in. You have to decide where you are, where you stand, and make a decision that I'm going to fight this way. You might lose some of the battles, but you are going to win the war at the end, because you're going to get through. I thank you all so much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
We have one question from the audience. So you have one? Just one question from the YouTube, from the live stream. And then
E-Race the Red Line asks, how do we advance efforts to assist Black women educators and researchers establish safe spaces where they are to engage in remembering and protecting research over time?
Yeah, you organize whatever group there is available that's around you. And if you do not have enough people, say for example, at your institution, that's why it's so significantly important that you join professional organizations or you be a part of the institute here. You have to go and find your space where you can be supportive. And sometimes it only takes 2-3 people to get something started. And don't make the mistake of assuming, I'm talking to everybody, don't make the mistake of assuming just because they look like you, they with you. Don't even go into that mistake. Whether they're students or whether they're faculty or whether they're staff, or the stories I could tell you, I'm out of time though, the stories I could tell you about Black women who work in corporate America and other settings about who supports and who doesn't support. And it's not just from the view of the people who are leadership. I've talked to sisters who had to work under powerful Black women. And sometimes they say, don't assume that they're going to support you because they're a Black woman. You know, it may be early on, I mean really early on, when I started doing this work, collecting the data in the 80s and the 90s, I had the opportunity to go to some MBA conferences. And I would talk, I was talking about my book, Sister Power, and invariably the sisters would come up and they wanted to talk about, what does this do to your personal life, all right? What happens if you become a powerful Black woman? The stories are distressing, absolutely distressing. But the truth of the matter is, you have to go into whatever personal relationships you have with the understanding, whoever your partner is that this is the person that I am, and these are the activities I'm going to be involved in. I used to tell the story about the women in Congress. Almost everybody in Congress is married. When I did the study of the Black women in Congress in 1992, the number of Black women in Congress, they were overwhelmingly single. If you become a congressperson, the women are just lying at your feet, throwing their underwear on a counter, take me. That does not happen with Black women. And so powerful Black women, Reverend Willie Barrows told me the story, and she's gone now. She told me the story. She said, she used to go all over Chicago, speaking about what Black people need to do. And sometimes, people wanted to honor her and talk with her and all. She said every event she went to, her husband was never with her because he could not stand the light, that was shining on her. And I say to people all the time, who's probably one of the most powerful Black women in America? Her name might be Oprah, but there's nobody to stand there and say, look, we're gonna make this a partnership together. There are so many examples of Black women who become powerful that pay the price too with their personal lives with their partners and sometimes with their children. One of the congresswomen told me, Carrie Meeks, congresswoman told me, she was at an event. She brought her son with her, and everybody was saying, Congresswoman, you done this for us, you done that for us. And her 14-year-old son said she does stuff for everybody but me. She said, what a dagger, But on the other hand, children are quite accustomed to having their mothers running around and being in powerful positions either. And so much has to be done in order to help, support people who are in these positions. And so much has to change in regards to what our expectations are and the way in which we interact with people. And on my last note, I have to give kudos to my husband, Bill Merritt, who is here, who at one point, when he was questioned about why can't you shut that woman up? Like, why do you let her talk like that? And his position was, I don't own her. I don't own her. And no, I'm not engaging in any activity to try to shut her up, And I know that wasn't the first time people came to him and said, can't you control this person? One of the women who was mayor of a major city said literally her husband tried to run the city from the bedroom, and he was getting his support from his boys, who, when he met his boys, would say repeatedly, "Can't you do something about that woman?" You know? And no. Of course, they're divorced now, but such is life. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad you let me have the opportunity to do this.
Fantastic. Well, you know, the problem is that we should have you more frequently.